Hey folks, it's Lou with What If Resources for Just In Case Preparedness, and today's a part 2 to a 3-part series, our second video on a conversation that is about if you could only have one item in your possession in a wilderness survival situation, what would that one item be? And experts, professionals, industry leaders have, for the most part, all agree that the one most important item that you can have, physical item, is in the category of tools. And that specific tool, if you could only have a one tool option, would be a knife. And we're going to talk about knives today. Obviously, the other thing that we talked about was, in addition to a physical item, it would be a skill. So there's one physical item that you should have, and then there's one skill set that you should definitely have. As far as the conversation being the most important, that skill set was firecraft. We're going to talk about that in part 3, our third video. But today, like I said, we're going to talk about knives. And industry leaders have really come together. They've put together a list of what our knives, the characteristics that our knives should possess, in order to give us the greatest benefit from this knife, the most amount of things, the most amount of tasks that we can perform with this knife. We're going to go over that today in great detail, so please stick around. So when we're talking about knives, you often hear people say, and it seems like there's always the same answer, right? When people say, well, what's the best knife to have in a survival situation? And the answer is almost inevitably, it's the knife that you have on. And well, there is some truth to that. Any knife is better than no knife, right? Just having some type of a cutting edge that you can process cordage, skin game, construct traps, deadfalls, primitive deadfall methods, etc. Anything is better than nothing. So any knife is important to have. However, hopefully you intended on going to the wilderness, and therefore you intentionally chose a specific knife to have in your possession, right? And so if that's the case, then what we want to do is we want to talk about the proper style of knife to have in a wilderness survival situation. What we're going to do real quick is we're going to go over a handful of different kinds of knives, and then we're going to get very specific onto what industry leaders suggest that we have in our possession if we're intentionally going into the wilderness, and therefore we inadvertently find ourselves in a wilderness survival situation. All right, let's take a look. All right, folks, so again, having any type of knife is better than no knife at all. However, we're going to look at a specific style or we're going to come to a conclusion based on what experts advise us as to what is probably the best, at the very least, style of knife that have X amount of characteristics to them. But we're going to look at a few different knives here. And I didn't bring out one of every single knife known to man. I didn't do that. But here's a knife right here. This is a folding knife. This specific one, it does not have any type of a lock to it whatsoever. But this knife, this particular one, has a couple of different blades, which would, I suppose, would always be nice, especially if you found yourself where possibly one blade went dull, then you could always use the other knife. Obviously, the different shapes and designs have different intents to them, but in this particular example, we're talking more along the lines of wilderness survival. So that's one type of knife there, just a folding knife. Here's another knife. This is also a folding knife. This is actually one I carry at work all the time. Now this one does have a locking mechanism, meaning that the blade will not inadvertently come closed on your fingers. This one has a serrated edge, or a partially serrated edge, and then another sharp edge as well. There's clearly a lot of there's work-oriented knives, there's very task-specific type knives, and then of course there's tactical knives. There's all different types of stuff. A lot of you preppers out there are going to have those types of knives in your possession. But then really the type of knife that experts are suggesting that we have in our possession if we're intentionally going into the wilderness, and therefore we have intentionally brought a knife with us just in case it becomes necessary that we use that knife. Really is a fixed blade knife. There's a lot of different characteristics that they're going to talk about. This specific one is one that I made. I actually bought the knife blank from a local merchant. But I bought the materials, the handle materials, the scales, the pins, the epoxy, all these other things at other places, and assembled the knife, sanded everything down. And if you want to take a look at some of that process, I don't have it in a video format, but I do have it in a blogging type format with tons of photos on my website. You can go there, whatifresource.com. There's a lot of resources on that website, by the way, so take this opportunity whenever or the earliest opportunity that you have, and go check that website out. So what experts are suggesting is, A, we have a fixed blade knife, okay? And then the other thing, there's going to be a long list here, but the other thing that they suggest is that we have a full tang. And what that means is that the blade goes all the way from the tip to the handle. It's full. There's no break. It's solid all the way through. There's other styles. I don't have an example here, but that has what's called a rat tail. Some are thicker tangs, but they stop about halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, something like that. But experts suggest that we carry a full tang, where it's full size and it goes all the way through the knife. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull these knives out of the way real quick. May bring them back into frame on occasion just for comparison, but right this second I'm going to go ahead and pull those out. Some other things that experts suggest that we have is, they suggest that the thickness of the steel, they suggest that we go from 1/8 of an inch to 3/16. Okay, what the concept there is, or what the idea there is if we get any thinner than 1/8 of an inch, it's not as structurally sound. It could potentially, if you were to pry, then the knife blade could break, or it could potentially bend. However, if it's any thicker than that, then the blade becomes very heavy and it becomes difficult to maintain control. You know, when you first use something heavy, then you don't get as fatigued, but as time goes on, you begin to get fatigued, and you could, unfortunately, you could then get a little bit carried away. Maybe the knife slips out of your hand, or maybe you accidentally hit something that you didn't intend on hitting, and ultimately at the end of the day, what you don't want to have happen is that you sustain some type of an injury. So they don't want you to get too thick. So 3/16 is about as wide as you want to go, and 1/8 of an inch is about as thin as you want to go. Now then, the next thing that they kind of talk about there, industry leaders talk about, is length. Okay, can you get too short? Well, as a matter of fact, you certainly can. If a knife gets too short, then it becomes very difficult to baton through wood. And there's a lot of other things that you would have challenges with doing, even beaver chewing through saplings and things like that, if a knife is too short. But if a knife is too long, and again, now that particular topic of a knife being too long, that's a little bit debatable, because if you were in like a jungle environment or something of that nature, you may very well want a machete, or you may want a parang or something like that. However, most wilderness survival applications, you don't want a knife that's too long, or same deal, it becomes to where it starts, you know, as you're carrying it, as an example, on your side, because it's in a sheath, it starts to get hung up on forest debris and things like that, limbs, stuff like that. So they don't want it too long. But in addition to that, if you want to get down into doing some type of fine carving or what have you, then you would end up, you know, with too big of a knife. It becomes far more challenging. And same deal, you really start to become, you can become fatigued. And so therefore they don't want your knife blade to be too awfully long. So too short's too short, too long's too long. So what is the proper length? Well, most people out there, most experts are really suggesting that your knife blade be a minimum of 4 inches and a maximum of 6 inches. And now we're talking about the blade here, not the overall length. What you should try to do is find a handle that fits your hand. This one is just a small, just a shade on the small side for my hands, but that's okay. It fits me really well. I really enjoy this knife. So, but the blade length between 4 inches and 6 inches. Okay. Another thing that they suggest is that you put what's called a 90-degree spine on the back of your knife. And the reasoning for that, let me get this knife back out again. Again, this is just my work knife. Probably on camera, they probably look the same, but the truth of it is that this has a very beveled edge on it. It's very rounded off. Okay, and so therefore, if I wanted to process material, you know, trying to make it finer so that I can do some type of firecraft or something like that, something of that nature, then I can't really do it. It doesn't do anything. Okay, I'm processing very small amounts of material there, so I'm not really accomplishing anything there. To where if I have something with a 90-degree spine on it, I'm not going to get too carried away here, trying to make this video as efficient as possible, but you can definitely see where this particular blade, because of the 90-degree spine, is removing a lot more material. So if I ever needed to do something to affect fire, then that is the right design criteria to have, is to have that 90-degree spine on there. In addition to that, your 90-degree spine, and just for clarity here, I'm in an environment right this moment where this location is under a stage 2 fire ban, and so therefore I'm not going to be able to strike this ferro rod for you on camera. I'll try to find some other footage where I've struck a fire rod or a ferro rod with the edge of a 90-degree knife, and see if I can't plug that into this video so that you can see it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is shave off some of that material in a very fast and effective way to get a spark to fly off of your ferro rod. So that's the reasoning behind the 90-degree spine. So full tang, 8 to 3/16 of an inch thick, 4 to 6 inches long, 90-degree spine. Okay. Another thing that they really kind of talk about is designs of knives. I don't have a really perfect example of a weaker design, but this is really what's called a drop point design, and this is one of the stronger ones, and certainly one of my most favorite designs. It's very, very strong. Notice the point is not center of the body of the knife. However, that's more of a Kepler style knife, and those are great styles as well. Very, very effective, carried by a lot of people, a lot of professionals. I really like the drop point design. Gives me a lot of strength, especially if I'm batoning. That's a really good, strong structural design. To where something that's a little bit more of a clip point, if you notice the material of the blade is getting really thin, and I'm not talking about the width, I'm just talking about the thickness there. And what that does is that creates an area where the tip of your knife could break off much easier. So in this particular example, the material stays wide, stays wide, stays wide, and really doesn't get small until the tip itself, to where some of these other designs, they have a tendency to fall out rather quickly. And unfortunately, now that serves a purpose in a lot of applications, but in wilderness survival, it's just not a perfect idea, because that reduces the structural integrity of that blade if you're batoning, if you're beaver chewing through saplings, etc. Okay, and then one of the other things that they like to talk about, or they suggest that we have, and this is another deal where it really depends on the environment that you're in. If you're in a very humid environment, or if you're in a very salty environment, like let's just say if you're in the ocean, or you're by the ocean, or you're in the swamps where there's a lot of brackish water and therefore the salinity of the water is extremely high. If you're in high humid environments, you may want to go with a stainless steel knife, okay? However, experts suggest that if you feel like you can get away with having a carbon steel knife, a high carbon steel, that is what they prefer that you take with you. And the reason for that is because when we're dealing with next fire mentality, if you have brought a high carbon steel knife, then you can use the spine of your knife in combination with a hard stone, such as flint. That's the one that most people know about. Chert, quartz, there's a handful of other stones, but you can use the back of the edge of this knife, the spine, with a sharp hardened stone, and in combination with charred materials, and you can make a flint and steel fire. So that gives you yet another fire option, right? And we talked about that. The most important item to have is a knife, but the most important skill to have is your firecraft. So again, as we talked about, having a ferro rod attached to your sheath, because a fixed blade knife, you're going to want a sheath, but having a ferro rod attached to your sheath certainly helps aid in your firecraft in combination with your knife. But then also having a high carbon steel knife, you can use that in conjunction with the stone and charred materials, and you can then have a flint and steel knife or flint and steel kit potentially with you by having your knife with you. The high carbon steels, there's a lot of different kinds out there, especially for knife blades. Just to name a few, there's 1095 HC, there's O1 tool steel, there's D2 tool steel, there's CPM3V. I've got a handful of knives with a handful of those various high carbon steels, and they all seem to throw a spark when struck with the appropriate stone. So give me just 1 second to round some of this stuff up. Folks, when I got back to my computer and I started editing the film footage for this particular video, I realized that when I was talking about the various characteristics of knife blades and knives, that I had forgotten to talk about the different grinds. And I was going to shoot some more footage of that outdoors, but then I realized it was very challenging to see the grinds of a knife blade on camera. So thought I might just sketch this out real quick. Probably a lot easier visual representation and easier to understand. So there's a lot of different grinds out there, and they all serve a different purpose. And industry leaders don't necessarily agree on the perfect grind that's out there, but there does seem to be two most favored type of grinds. So we're just going to talk about those two grinds real quick. And before I sketch this out, so if you were to look at a knife at this angle right here, noticing this is the spine, this is the sides, and this would be the grind right here. If you were to look at it at that angle, one of the grinds that is very popular, if this were the side or a side, this was the spine, this is another side, then one of the grinds, it's called a Scandi grind. The grind rides way up the sides. It's a very high profile, and the material's fairly thin throughout the height of the knife there. But this lends itself really well to a lot of fine carving tasks. So you'll see that a lot in bushcraft, where there is a lot of carving, but it also does translate right on over to survival as well. Some of the fine carving tasks that you may find yourself doing in survival is carving notches, like L7 notches, when you're doing some primitive trapping and things like that. And one of the big ones that it lends, this particular grind lends itself towards, is making feather sticks. And I think that's important to mention, especially since we are talking about, in this particular video, or video series here, this series where the most important thing is a knife, and the physical thing is a knife, and the most important skill is your firecraft. Making feather sticks is a huge component to that and can really help contribute towards transferring a flame into a successful fire. So Scandi is a really good one. Again, there's two popular ones, but Scandi is one of those popular ones. And another one is called a saber grind. And what that kind of looks like is you have the spine of the knife, you have the two sides, and then it really comes down quickly to the grind, and that being the sharp edge of the knife right there. What this has a tendency to lend itself to is, yeah, you can still do some carving, you still cut notches. It's not as favorable when you're doing feather sticks, but it is still capable of doing feather sticks. This material at the Scandi is much thinner, which helps it during the carving, but it could potentially, during heavy abuse, or I hate to use the term abuse, but let's just say heavy impacts, like when you're batoning or when you're beaver chewing and things like that, it could potentially cause a break just simply because that material's thinner there. So the saber, with it being wide all throughout this area and then just very quickly comes to a point, what that helps out with is really the structural integrity and the strength. So in a wilderness survival application, that's why industry leaders kind of lean both ways. This one is really great for making feather sticks and carving notches, but this one is really great for heavy impact type applications. So really is your choice. I have multiple knives with both of these types of grinds, Scandi on some of mine and saber on some of the other ones. I like both of them. They both work out really well. I do have a tendency to carry Scandi when I am bushcrafting, and I do have a tendency to carry saber when I'm probably more along the lines of just out hunting or something like that. I don't really intend on using my fixed blade knife unless I find myself in a wilderness survival situation, to where a Scandi is one that I carry more of a bushcraft setting when I am intending on using my fixed blade knife on a regular basis. So I just wanted to throw this into the video real quick to help some of you folks understand exactly what we're up against on that. Alrighty folks, thanks for joining us. Hopefully this video gives you a list of characteristics that you can look for when you're going out and trying to purchase the next knife that you intentionally plan on taking with you when you go out into the wilderness. Please stick around for the next video where we talk and we get very deep into firecraft, the most important skill that you can possess, knowledge and experience-based skill. Thanks.